Scary telling. I never imagined that my recent obsession with learning Morse code would lead me down a path of terror and horror. At first, it was just a fun little hobby that kept me occupied during my free time. But then, strange things started happening. It started with the birds. They would gather outside my window every morning and peck at the glass. At first, I thought they were just looking for food or trying to get my attention. But then, I noticed something strange. They were tapping their beaks in a pattern that was all too familiar to me now. It was Morse code. I tried to ignore it at first, telling myself that I was just imagining things. But the birds persisted, every day tapping out the same message, "It's coming." At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a coincidence, or maybe it was some kind of prank. But as the days went by, things only got worse. I started hearing strange noises in my house at night, footsteps that seemed to come from nowhere, and whispers that I couldn't quite make out. And then, one night, I woke up to find that I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, trapped in my own body as a shadowy figure loomed over me. Its eyes were glowing, and its mouth twisted into a sinister grin. It whispered something in my ear, something that I couldn't quite make out, before disappearing into the darkness. After that night, I knew that I had to take the Morse code message seriously. I started researching, trying to figure out what its coming could possibly mean. And then, I found it. There was a legend in my town, a legend about a creature that only came out at night, a creature that was said to feed on the souls of the living. It was called the Nightwalker, and according to the legend, it would only come for those who had learned the language of the dead. I was terrified, but I couldn't deny the truth. The Morse code had brought the Nightwalker to my doorstep, and now I was trapped in a battle for my very soul. I tried everything to get rid of it. I moved houses, changed my phone number, and even tried to forget Morse code altogether. But no matter what I did, the Nightwalker always found me. Its whispers grew louder, its presence more palpable, and its hunger more insatiable. And then, one night, I had an idea. I picked up my Morse code machine and started tapping out a message to the Nightwalker. It was a message of defiance, a message that said that I would never give in to its power. At first, there was silence. But then, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The Nightwalker was tapping back, tapping out a message of its own. It was a message that I couldn't quite decipher, but I knew what it meant. It was a message of challenge, a message that said that the Nightwalker would never give up, and neither would I. From that night on, I knew that the battle with the Nightwalker would never end. But I also knew that I was strong enough to face it, that I had the power of Morse code on my side. So now, every night, I sit in my room with my Morse code machine at the ready, tapping out messages to the Nightwalker, challenging it, and daring it to come for me. And every night, it taps back, a reminder of the horrors that lurk just beyond our world, waiting for those brave enough to face them. I was on a business trip and staying at a small hotel in the middle of nowhere. It was a dingy place, with dimly lit hallways and peeling wallpaper. But it was cheap, and I didn't plan on spending much time in my room anyway. The first night was uneventful. I fell asleep quickly after a long day of meetings and didn't wake up until the early hours of the morning. I was thirsty, so I got out of bed, made my way to the bathroom, and took a drink of water from the tap. As I made my way back to bed, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. I turned to look, and there it was. A figure, lying in my bed, its face blue and its eyes hollow. It was me. I screamed and stumbled back, falling to the floor. But when I looked up, the figure was gone. I tried to tell myself that it was just my imagination, that I was tired and stressed from work. But the image of my lifeless body stayed with me, haunting me, as I tried to go back to sleep. The next day, I tried to shake it off and focus on my work. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about that hotel room. It felt heavy, like a weight was pressing down on my chest. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw that image of my dead body lying in the bed. That night, I tried to stay awake as long as I could. But exhaustion took over, and I fell asleep. And that's when the nightmares began. In my dream, I was back in that hotel room, but it was different this time. The walls were dripping with blood, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. And in the corner of the room, there was a figure, shrouded in darkness. It spoke to me in a voice that sounded like it was coming from the depths of hell. It told me that I was in room 13, the cursed room, and that I would never leave alive. And then it vanished, leaving me alone in the room with only the sound of my own terrified breathing. I woke up, drenched in sweat, and knew that I had to leave that place. But as I got out of bed, I saw it again. My lifeless body, lying there, staring off into the distance. And then it vanished, leaving me alone with the realization that I was not alone in that room. I packed my bags and left the hotel, never looking back. But the image of my dead body haunted me for weeks, months, and even years. I couldn't shake it off, no matter how hard I tried. Years later, I heard that the hotel had been shut down. Rumors circulated about the strange occurrences that had happened in room 13, about the ghostly figure that haunted the place, driving people to the brink of insanity. I knew then that I wasn't alone, that I wasn't crazy. Something had been in that room with me, something that had shown me the face of my own death. And even though I had escaped with my life, I knew that I would never be truly free from the haunting of room 13. I opened my eyes to a blinding light and the beeping of machines. My body was racked with pain, and I could feel a searing heat all around me. As my vision cleared, I realized that I was in a hospital bed, my body covered in burns. But as I tried to move, I felt restraints holding me down, and I realized that something was very wrong. And that's when I saw him, the man in the white gown, holding a steel wool brush in his hand. He approached me, his face expressionless, and began scrubbing at my burned skin with the brush. I screamed, the pain intensifying with each stroke, but he continued without a word. It was then that I knew I wasn't in a hospital. I was in a torture chamber. I tried to fight back, to break free from the restraints, but they held me firmly in place. And as the man continued his brutal assault, I knew that I was at his mercy. Hours passed, and I lost track of time. The man left, and I was left alone in the dark, my body screaming in agony. But then, I heard a sound. Footsteps, getting closer and closer. A door opened, and a woman walked in, dressed in a lab coat. She approached me, and I could see the fear in her eyes. She told me that I was in a secret government facility, and that they were experimenting with a new type of weapon. A weapon that could cause burns and intense pain without leaving any visible marks. She told me that I was a test subject, and that they were trying to perfect the weapon. And then she left, leaving me alone in the dark once again. Days turned into weeks, and I lost all sense of time. The man in the white gown would come in every so often, always with a new torture device in hand. And the woman in the lab coat would come in and tell me more about their sick experiments, trying to justify their actions. But then, something changed. The woman started to act differently. She would bring me food and water, and even tried to help me escape. She told me that she couldn't take it anymore, that she had seen enough of the horrors that they were inflicting on me. We made a plan, and I was finally able to escape. But as I fled the facility, I knew that I could never truly escape the horrors that I had endured. Years later, I still have nightmares about that torture chamber, about the man in the white gown and the woman in the lab coat. And I know that there are more like them out there, people who are willing to inflict unspeakable horrors on innocent victims in the name of science. But I refuse to let them win. I will continue to speak out against these atrocities, to make sure that no one else has to endure the same hell that I did. And I will never forget the pain, the fear, and the desperation that I felt in that secret government facility. I had always been skeptical about psychics, but something in me had urged me to visit one. Maybe it was just curiosity, or maybe it was the hope that I could find some answers to the questions that had been plaguing me for a while. But what the psychic had told me had shaken me to the core. "You will die of a heart attack," she had said, her voice laced with an eerie certainty. I couldn't stop thinking about it, and it had become an obsession. I started exercising, eating healthy, and doing everything in my power to make sure that I wouldn't die of a heart attack. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself that I was going to be okay, I couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. One day, I decided to take up biking. It was a way to keep myself active while exploring the world around me. I would go on 5-mile rides into town every weekend, and it became my new obsession. It felt good to be out in the open air, to feel the wind in my hair, and to watch the world fly by. But one day, something happened that changed everything. I was on my way back home, my car suddenly swerved in front of me. I could see an old man slumped over the steering wheel, and the car was heading straight towards me. In that moment, time seemed to slow down, and I realized with final clarity that the psychic had not meant a heart attack caused by my own physical condition. It was something else entirely. I tried to swerve out of the way, but it was too late. The car hit me with a loud thud, and I was thrown off my bike. I could feel the impact of the ground as I hit it, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. Most of my body was covered in burns from the fire that had broken out in the car after it hit me. The doctors told me that I was lucky to be alive, but I didn't feel lucky. I felt like I had cheated death, like I was living on borrowed time. As I lay there in that hospital bed, trying to make sense of what had happened, a thought occurred to me. Maybe the psychic had given me a warning, not a prophecy. Maybe it was a sign that I needed to be more careful, to live my life to the fullest, and to appreciate every moment. Maybe it was a reminder that life is fragile and that we never know what's going to happen next. And maybe, just maybe, it was a sign that there is something out there, something beyond our comprehension, something that we can't control or predict. Something that is watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. I never went to a psychic again, but I never forgot the warning that I had been given. It stayed with me, haunting me, reminding me that life is precious and that we should never take it for granted. And though I still don't know what the future holds, I know that I will face it head on, with courage and with hope. Because sometimes, that's all we can do in this world, hope that we will make it through the next day, and the next, and the next. I always wanted to work in a butcher shop. Something about the way the sharp knives cut through the meat and the smell of blood made me feel alive. So when I heard about a new butcher shop opening up in town, I jumped at the chance to work there. The owner, Mr. Johnson, was a kind man who took me under his wing and taught me everything he knew about the business. I quickly became his apprentice and was soon responsible for helping him prepare the meat for sale. One day, while I was alone in the back room preparing the day's cuts, a man walked in. He was tall, with piercing eyes and a wide grin that made my skin crawl. He introduced himself as Jack and said he was looking for a special cut of meat. I didn't like the way he was looking at me, but Mr. Johnson had always taught me to be polite to customers. So I smiled and asked him what he was looking for. "That's a good boy," Jack said, patting my shoulder. "I'm looking for something special, something fresh." I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. There was something about Jack that didn't feel right, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. I showed him the meat we had available, but he shook his head. "No, no, no. That won't do. I want something that's still alive." I felt a shiver run down my spine. What kind of sick person was this? But before I could say anything, he pulled out a knife and held it up to my throat. "I think you'll do just fine," he said, grinning. I tried to scream, but he covered my mouth with his hand. I struggled against him, but he was too strong. And then I felt the knife run down my skin, cutting deep into my flesh. It was the most intense pain I had ever felt. But as I lay there, bleeding on the floor, I felt an odd sense of happiness. Maybe it was the shock, maybe it was the adrenaline, but I couldn't help but feel grateful that I was finally experiencing the thrill of being a butcher. But as I looked up at Jack, still grinning from ear to ear, I realized the truth. I wasn't the butcher, I was the meat. And Jack was the one who was going to carve me up. As I slipped into unconsciousness, I could hear him humming a tune that sounded vaguely familiar. And then, everything went black. I woke up in a cold sweat, gasping for air. It was just a nightmare, I told myself. But as I looked down at my skin, I saw a long, jagged scar running down my chest. It was then that I realized that my dream was more than just a nightmare. It was a premonition. And unless I did something to stop it, it was going to come true.